So to make sure that we honor everyone's time, we're going to go ahead and get started. So if we can go to that welcome slide. Wonderful. So as you all enter today, just say hi in the chat, share where you're from and who you are. Share something you hope to learn today, because we do have an exciting presentation about using data to make implementation happen. Throughout today's webinar, please use the chat to ask questions. We will have time at the end of today's presentation for you to ask questions as well, if you don't put those in during the presentation. And we are going to have that brief for you. There will be a link to the brief that accompanies this webinar that will be shared with you very soon. All right. So next slide. So who's here today? I'm Yolanda Perkins. I am an implementation specialist with the National Implementation Research Network with NIRN. And I am here to present to you and to introduce to you some wonderful people that I've gotten to work with over the past couple of years. So you'll have Jamahr McDaniel, who is a Senior Director of Curriculum Services at UnboundEd Core Learning. You'll also have Kathleen Stevens, Director of Curriculum Services at UnboundEd Core Learning. And they have been working with two excellent educators, Emily Hare, who is our Director of K-12 Mathematics at Guilford County Schools in North Carolina, and Jimmy Leek, the Research Analyst, aka Research Guru at Guilford County Schools in North Carolina. So they will be doing the bulk of the presenting today to share with you how they have been using data to make implementation happen. Right? So next slide. My work with UnboundEd Core Learning, Jamahr and Kat, as well as working with Guilford County Schools, is part of the Effective Implementation Cohort, or you'll hear us say the EIC project. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of background information about that. So let's go on to the next slide. So we have a few some information to share. One, the aim of the EIC is to increase school districts' capacity to implement a high-quality middle grade math curriculum to accelerate learning for students experiencing poverty that identify as Black, Latino, Latina, or are English learner designated students. And as part of this work, the EIC will learn and share with others outside of the project what districts need to have in place for effective implementation, what aspects of implementation at the district and school level most benefit priority students, and those priority students are the students that I noted earlier, and the work involved in making site-wide implementation successful. Okay. Next slide. So with that, we have 4 categories that are in our EIC learning agenda. There is the application of established practice, variability in implementation, enabling context, and measurement. So as we have been learning throughout this cohort, we have been looking at those specific 4 areas. And one of the things that you will hear about today is measurement, the use of data, as well as the enabling context of what's being done to learn about Guilford County Schools to make sure that the implementation meets their needs, right? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our UnboundEd Core Learning team and Guilford County Schools team. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Yolanda. And we are excited to share with you today about how UnboundEd Core Learning and Guilford County Schools have partnered together during the effective implementation cohort to use data effectively to make implementation in middle schools happen. Next slide. Thank you. All right, and so during today's session, we're going to start by setting the stage for the work that we've done together, share about the importance of district implementation teams, how we use the district capacity assessment process and the analysis to reflect and create action steps as a team, and then we will also share how we progress monitor through the implementation work to make progress and sustain this work. Finally, we will open the floor for questions. We will have time at the end for a Q&A. If you have any questions throughout this session, feel free to add them to the chat and we will try to respond to those throughout the webinar. Slide.
So I'm going to actually go back one slide. So hello, everyone. Again, my name is Emily Hare with Guilford County Schools. And I just wanted to share, kind of set the stage and the tone for the rest of the work that we're going to talk about today. We are one of the largest districts in the United States. We're the third largest district in North Carolina. So we serve quite a few teachers and students and educators. And the rest of our demographics are on the screen. I think a big piece to setting the stage for what you're going to learn about today is the part at the bottom on the left side of the screen that talks about our year of curriculum adoption. We actually adopted the program that we use for our middle school math students in the 2018-2019 school year. There was not a lot of intentional implementation work that happened with that adoption. So as you can imagine, implementation was slow. Then there's this thing that happened in 2020, if you all remember. So we had the COVID years, a lot of stuff happening. So we just really felt like we needed a reset, which is why we entered into this partnership with UnboundEd Core. And we're so excited to be a part of the EIC work. Next slide, please. So when we started this project, we spent a lot of time thinking about what our vision for high quality curriculum implementation would look like. Why are we doing this work? So I'm actually going to read this on the screen just so everyone has a chance, if you're driving, to hear it. But the vision that we came out of in that planning, those beginning planning stages, were we will provide high quality math resources and instruction that ensures equitable outcomes for our systematically marginalized student groups, including Black students, Latinx students, students with disabilities, and English learners. Each and every student will be provided equitable math instruction aligned to grade level standards. So we really specifically wanted to partner with UnboundEd and Core for this grant because of their vision for supporting schools. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to UnboundEd Core to set the stage a little bit more.
Thanks, Emily. And so at Core, it is our mission to partner with educators to design and implement solutions to their greatest challenges in achieving educational justice. We partner with schools and districts to ensure all students graduate college and career ready. Our vision is for educators to disrupt inequities and transform teaching and learning so that each and every student thrives in school. Finally, within our curriculum services team, the vision of our work is to build a capacity of district and school leaders to create structures that center the implementation of high quality instruction materials so that teachers can ensure equitable outcomes for all students. Next slide. Our curriculum service model supports districts like yours in the adoption process through successful implementation of high quality instruction materials. Within that model, we provide district and school implementation supports as well as professional learning. Next slide. Our district and school implementation support, it spans over 3 years. In year one, our focus is to build leader capacity around the adopted materials and help develop a school-based curriculum implementation system that leaders can use to support teachers with implementation. In year two, we continue to grow the leader capacity with coaching support for teachers to improve their delivery of the adopted curriculum. We also provide targeted professional learning to leaders to continue building their capacity in the support of curriculum implementation. And finally, in year three, we focus on fostering the sustainability for both the district and school leaders so they can take ownership of the systems and processes that we have provided them. Our model for school implementation supports 3 areas: classroom walkthroughs, professional learning, and data and review and planning, all in support of monitoring and improving curriculum implementation. Next slide. So now I'm going to pass it over to Kat to share about the importance of our support for the district implementation teams.
Thanks, Jamahr. So before we even begin working with districts, we ask them to designate what we call a sponsor and driver of the work to be able to support our partnership. So that sponsor plays a key role in setting the stage for the vision of the work. They help define the parameters of the project and ensure that there's coherence across all of the other work within the district. That person we ask is somebody that's directly connected to the superintendent if it's not the superintendent. So this could be an assistant superintendent, a chief academic officer, somebody on a cabinet team. And then we have the driver of the project. So the driver is somebody that works alongside the UnboundEd Core Learning Director to be able to move the work forward. That person manages the implementation. They facilitate the work of the full district implementation team. They ensure progress towards the team's goals actually happens. This could be a director of curriculum or somebody that has direct connection to the sponsor. Next slide, please. So then we work with that sponsor and driver to determine who should make up the district implementation team. We want to make sure that these people can play the designated roles that we define here on this screen, and be able to have direct connections to any stakeholders that are involved in implementation. So that could be a direct connection to the school administrators, to teachers, to students, to families, to community members, all of the above. Some of the members might hold multiple roles within the team. So for example, the district math director could be the driver of the work, but they could also be the content support and professional learning expert. While the district area superintendent could be the sponsor of the work, but also have that professional learning context and principal supervisor experience. So as you can see, all of the roles have importance on the team, and they need to be aware of those roles and how they support accomplishing the implementation goals and building that district capacity and having the systems to manage future implementations. So now I want to pass it over to Emily, because I want to ask her to share about the experience within Guilford County Schools and how they took that process to create the district implementation team, and then how it's evolved over the past few years. Next slide, please.
So in Guilford County, we have a large district team. So there's been this push and pull of who's meeting regularly versus making sure that we have voices and representatives from multiple different departments on the team. And so Jimmy is my colleague, and Jimmy, if you have anything you want to add to this, just let me know. But I think one really nice thing that's come out of our work in Guilford County is we have sort of two subsets of the district implementation team. So we have the core group that meets weekly. Sometimes it seems like daily or all the time. I'm just joking. It's really weekly. We have a core group that's meeting constantly to keep the work moving forward. But then we also have the fuller implementation team. The one that meets weekly is actually on your screen now. So you'll notice that both the sponsors and the drivers are on this work. And then the broader team meets quarterly at first. We'll talk about this more in the future slides, but we meet less regularly, but still get them into the work because we've noticed that when they're not coming to some of the activities that we have through the grant, they're less connected, as you all can imagine. And so we have those two different levels of DIT members, but in either level, we ensure that they are connected to the work and a part of the work, so that we're all norming on what the purpose of this grant work is, this implementation work, and how we can all support each other moving forward.
Thanks, Emily. So why are these teams even important? You can see here on the chart on the left that the research shows that with no implementation team support, there was only 14% growth in implementation over a 17-year period. That's what we're calling letting it happen, versus with a strong implementation team, over 80% growth in practice occurred within a 3-year period, which we're calling making it happen. So as you can see, just in the research alone, by having a team, we can potentially increase the growth in implementation and change the practice by 80% within a 3-year period. Next slide, please. So I want to give you the opportunity to actually look at these 3 areas. So letting it happen, helping it happen, and making it happen. I want you to take a minute to read over these 3 areas. And in the chat, if you'll put in the chat which of the 3 areas do you feel like you currently are in your context? So letting it happen, helping it happen, or making it happen. Notice the difference of where you are currently and where you want to be by making it happen. So in the chat, to know where you feel you are currently in implementation. I love seeing the different contexts. And yes, Amanda, I agree. There are many times where we slip back and forth in between these over periods of time. We definitely feel that with you right now. So as we began the work with Guilford in 2021, they told us that they had fully adopted curriculum in 2018, but wanted to work with us to really be strategic with purposeful implementation practices and supports for not just the teachers, but all the stakeholders involved in implementation. Go ahead to the next slide. So during our work with district implementation teams, we focus on 4 key areas. So we focus on setting the vision and goals, working on communication across all stakeholders, providing professional learning for stakeholders within the system, and goal tracking to ensure our districts are making and sustaining progress based on their vision and goals. Next slide, please. So as Emily was talking about earlier, we hold multiple meetings throughout the year with the sponsor and driver and with the full implementation team. The purpose of the sponsor driver meeting is to support the sponsor and driver in planning, managing implementation, leading the curriculum implementation team to make sure that there's that distributive leadership and that there's coherence across all of the work they have going on in the district as it pertains to implementation. The full district implementation team meetings are to work as a team to make sure that they're building and sustaining that capacity to support the effective implementation efforts within the district. Next slide, please. So the next thing I want to share is how we use the district capacity assessment that NIRN provided for us to support the districts. This was a process when we first started this. We had no idea what we were going to experience. And I want to give a shout out to Yolanda. She was so helpful in this process. So I want to share a little bit for those of you that have not gone through a district capacity assessment, or what I'll call a DCA. I want to share what this is. So it's designed to support the district implementation teams with aligning those resources and identifying action steps to help strengthen their implementation of their curriculum or their innovation with evidence-based practice. So the assessment focuses on 3 areas within the questions. So it focuses on organizational leadership, competency, data systems for decision making. So during this process, they are asked to rate each question individually on a scale of 0, 1, and 2. Then after each person shares their rating, the team goes through a process of getting a consensus rating. And so that process prompts conversations within the team for actions to support the use of implementation best practices. And it gives them that opportunity to have conversations during the process, to have discussions of what's going on in the work, what things are not happening, and really support them in having a team and consensus. So then I want to share on the next slide, please. So with the district capacity assessment, they use this to engage in those action planning process. So what we ask them to do is prioritize 2 or 3 areas for action planning within their work. So what we do with this in our work is in our sponsor and driver meetings and in our district implementation team meetings, we always talk about those DCA items and really lift those up in conversation. That way we're using them to support our work. We work on identifying 1 or 2 quick wins because you always want to have a quick win. Let's find this item that we can jump in and really get it done and make change. They're fast, they're cheap, they don't require a whole lot of resources. They're within the team's control. That's one area that we really had to work on is we don't always have control over everything, but what can we take control of right now and have as a quick win? So if it show us results, we can reverse that and try something different. And then they're easy, so it doesn't require a whole lot of coordination or planning, and it's low risk. Next slide, please. So I want to be able to share with you all of the progress monitoring that we do in this work for EIC. So as you can see on this screen, there is a lot of data that we have had come out of this project. So we have data that supports our implementation plan, and we actually just reviewed our implementation plan recently. And these are the areas that we focus in on as a district implementation team. So Emily talked about earlier about setting that vision for our work together. We come back on a consistent basis, looking at that vision and making sure that we're keeping that at the forefront of our work. We look at our leadership and partnerships. So who is leading this work? What other partners are going to be involved in this? So in Guilford, for example, they have partnerships with an outside group that supports them with coaching. So making sure that we have alignment with that work. Then we talked about earlier about that implementation team. We go back and look at that each year to say, okay, this is who was on the implementation team this year. Do they need to still be on the team, or do we need to add more people on, or have they gone on to other projects? So we define that implementation team. Of course, looking at the curriculum, is it still in play? Are we making any changes? That theory of action. So if we do this, then this happens. Of course, our goals. We'll talk more about those and being able to progress monitor those and think about what we're measuring throughout the project to support meeting each of those goals. And then really looking at the capacity needs to support the work. There's a lot that goes into curriculum implementation besides just putting books in front of students and teachers. So really thinking about what are we doing to support the work? How are we making this communication happen to all stakeholders? And really making sure that we are investing all efforts to build and sustain capacity of everybody involved. Then the other things that we have in this work are surveys. So each year we do surveys to that district implementation team, to all the school leaders involved in the work, to teachers and to students. And then what we just talked about with the district capacity assessment, we do curriculum integrity data. So with our work that Jamahr was sharing earlier, in each walkthrough that we do, we have data that comes out of that to support the discussion around curriculum implementation. And then every time we support the schools in the work, at the end of that, they create action steps and what we call next level work. So we monitor that and look at that qualitative data to be able to support their conversations around what are they doing with their action steps and how are they making progress with their work. So I want to pass it off to Emily and Jimmy to be able to have them talk about the DCA process and what that has looked like for their work.
So these next few slides, I think, are really more of a conversation between Jimmy and myself. So Jimmy, if you want to come off mute at any time and join in, feel free. I'm going to get started and try to think back on the very beginning when we first started this DCA process. And then we'll just kind of talk between the two of us about our actual experiences on the ground with some of this work. Jimmy, does that work for you?
Yep, sounds good, Emily.
There you go. So I know this was a couple of years ago now, but when this first started, I was in a different role. So I was still one of the drivers, but I was the middle school math coordinator when it first started. I've now moved into the director position for K-12. But when it first started, I remember getting an email saying that we have a 7,000 hour meeting, just joking. It was 3 hours, but it was a long one with all of these rubrics around what's happening. We had been in the grant work at that point for almost a full year with schools. And I think it was in the early spring of that first year of grant work with schools. And so it was super unfamiliar for me. I wasn't really sure what the purpose was, what the point was. We had talked about it, but I hadn't experienced it yet. Jimmy, I don't know if you remember when that first communication went out. Any thoughts to add?
Yeah, I think like Emily was saying, most people didn't know what a district capacity assessment was, what DCA stood for, even, because we kept throwing around that term. And I think they were just like, okay, why is this meeting so long? Why are we all having to come together to do this thing? We know we're doing the work, but what is this about? And so I think it was a really good opportunity once we actually got there and got into it to have conversations that we had not had before, because we were just moving forward and doing the work, and everybody was trying to get things going and off the ground. And even though we were having the check-ins, they were more operational check-ins and not as big of a picture, strategy check-ins, that kind of thing. So yeah.
Yeah. So I think I remember there was one piece at the time, again, I said I was working as the middle school coordinator. So a lot of the logistical calendaring of school walks and that type of thing was kind of falling in my plate. And I remember the small group, there was 2 different DITs going on. There was the sponsored driver meeting that happens weekly, and then the larger group. The small group really had opportunities to see some of the unbalanced workload. But the larger DIT team didn't really have the opportunity to see some of that workload that was happening for just a few folks on the implementation team. So I remember going into it and thinking, I'm not really sure what this conversation is going to be like, but we really want to make sure that an outcome of this is that the full DIT team has the opportunity to see what the workload really is like at the managerial level of just calendaring events and stuff like that for the drivers of the work. And so that was kind of like our whispered goal when we went into the DCA of we've got to make sure that this happens and this outcome comes out of this process. So what was really interesting is, one of the indicators or the rubric pieces on the DCA talked about the capacity of sharing the workload. I can't remember the exact code right now, but one of those talked about the capacity of the team members, and we were able to have open and honest conversations, particularly because we all had to vote on where are we falling in this rubric, 0, 1, 2. Well, we were all over the place, right? Because some of us had the opportunities to see how a couple of us were holding the majority of the work, and then a couple of us haven't. And so through that conversation, we had to go, wait a second, some of us are voting a 0 here, some of us are voting a 1, some of us are voting a 2. What's going on? And that allowed us to share some stories about, well, did you realize this? And let's share what this piece from my perspective is like. And we came out of that meeting thinking about, maybe we should use some of the grant funds that we have through this work to think about extra support for some of the tedious processes like calendaring the school events. So that was a really cool thing that I remember from that first year, is that we were all unsure of what that conversation was going to be like. And we almost went in with, I don't know what this is going to be like, but I want this to happen. And it actually did happen in a really organic and honest way. So Jimmy, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, just to add a little bit, I think we realized too that, Emily was talking about the different scores that people were giving on the DCA. So you can give a 0, 1, or 2, like Kat was talking about. And depending on how far you feel like you're along, and we were giving different scores on some things, we realized that some people on the district implementation team knew about processes or systems or thought they knew about processes, and other people didn't. So Emily might know of the communication plan, but I wasn't aware of that. Or somebody else on the, we had, assistant superintendents on the call or on the meeting who knew about processes that we didn't necessarily know about. So that was really good to sort of have everybody again together to figure out what those things are and say, oh yeah, that we do have a process about this, but just, you know, everybody's not aware. So let's make that aware. Or we don't have a process, or we don't have it written down in a way that people could reference it if somebody left. And then how do we do this because, you know, Emily's not there anymore or something like that. So, yeah.
And we have a more clear example of that in the year 2. So I'm going to hold off on saying too much more
Sure.
about that. But I saw a question that popped in the chat from Ellen that said, is your team considering continuing to do an annual DCA once the grant portions project ends? And I think that's something that's really interesting about the DIT in general, because technically the DIT is because of the grant work, right? But we are already we're approaching year 3. I'm not sure if we're actually in year 3. We're either already in year 3 or approaching year 3 very quickly. And we're already talking about the wonderful things that have come out of having a math-centered district implementation team. So for those of you who are in other districts, you might have a multi-tiered system of support district implementation team or some other DIT teams for other areas, which is a subset of that, right? But one that's just specific and focused on our math implementation and how helpful it's been and how helpful these conversations have been in the collaboration and even the DCA. So I can't say for sure because we're not there yet, but we are definitely continuing the DIT teams because we're already setting up calendar things for that in the future. And then the DCA is also a part of what we want to continue. Now, there is conversation about how to merge that a bit with some other things that we're doing, like with MTSS and some other areas in our district, but we are still wanting some piece that's still centered around math because the indicators that are in the DCA are just more specific to curriculum implementation and a specific curriculum implementation, and we have found that very valuable in our work. So that was a really long answer to that very short question. I'm sorry, but we're still in the process, but very interested in doing that. A couple of other things that came out of that first year of DCA is just to make sure that we're incorporating multiple voices from other departments. So we talked about earlier a slide with the different departments that were on the team and the larger DIT team, the smaller one. But we realized in that first DCA, wait a second, I mentioned multi-tier systems of support. We realized that the director of multi-tiered systems of support wasn't even on the district implementation team for the middle school math work. And that didn't make a lot of sense because a lot of the stuff that we were doing for our curriculum implementation work is the same sort of conversations we were having with the multi-tiered systems of support. And so how do we collaborate together to leverage the work that's happening in both places with the multi-tiered systems of support being kind of overarching umbrella of that? And so we also realized that we didn't have an EC director at the time, or there was an additional member from that team we wanted to add. There was someone from an academically, intellectually gifted department that we didn't have. And we had issues around, not issues, but challenges where, what does this curriculum look like for AIG students? What does it look like for students with disabilities? And having all of those voices in on the work at the same time was really important. So the DCA was one of the huge reasons how we realized that there are missing voices from our full district team. And that was another thing that came out of that first year that we weren't even expecting. That was a surprise thing. We knew about the adding an additional person, but that was another surprise. And then also how we were sharing data with stakeholders. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the research analyst / data guru of Guilford County Schools, Jimmy, to talk about the insight from that year 1 and how we responded to that insight.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. So again, as a part of the district capacity assessment, there were several questions around data systems, how we were collecting data, and using that data to inform the implementation and make changes, make adjustments where needed, that type of thing. And we realized that through that district capacity assessment process that we had some pieces in place, but we were still not quite where we wanted to be in terms of that, district level team having access to the data, but also the school level teams having access to the data that we were collecting. How are they using that data? How are they making changes based off the data that they have? And how are we as a district team, as a research and evaluation team in the district, supporting them to make those decisions and use the data in a way that will help and benefit their schools. So if you want to go to the next slide. I'm going to start, so there's a lot of stuff here, but I'm going to start by, again, talking through a little bit about our process and what we're doing in terms of the activities of the grant. One of the main activities that we do is a series of walkthroughs. So we call them, instructional walks or integrity walkthroughs at the school, where groups from district, from UnboundEd and core, from the school leadership teams, principals, assistant principals, and curriculum facilitators or coaches in the schools participate in observing teachers on how they're implementing instruction in their mathematics instruction in their building. One of our main goals for the grant was to, again, make sure that teachers were utilizing the curriculum, but not just using the curriculum, they were using it with fidelity, or what we call integrity, right? And so we wanted to have a systematic way, working with, again, UnboundEd and core, how we collect that data. And it's been an iterative process. I think Kat and Jamahr can speak to that. Emily can as well. And we're still in the iteration process. What we decided after the year one is we had a series of indicators. Some were slightly different than this, than what you're seeing here, but we were collecting those through a Google form, and that was fine. It worked on the day of, where we were debriefing from the three, instructional walkthroughs we did with teachers during that day. But for collecting that long term and for having a place where we could see that data and keep it and house it and make sure that the schools could see that data in a systematic way, it just really wasn't working for us. And so we worked with, again, UnboundEd and core. They introduced another different application program, and then we sort of built on that. And I think one of our other data gurus is on the call, Trisha Mitchell, who helped build this Microsoft Power app. We had a similar app built by Trisha and the data analytics team for our tutoring program. And so we sort of built off of that. And the way it works is that everybody in our district we're a Microsoft district. And so everybody is already in the system, in the Microsoft Office 365 system, and everybody has access, or you can give access to different people to Power Apps. So if you look to the far left, this is what people will see when they first open the app, who have been given access. Again, this is for school leadership teams for the most part, but also district support staff like Emily or myself or other people on that district implementation team can have access to it as well. And so when we're at the school, you would start a new walkthrough. And then that second slide is where you say, what type of walkthrough is this? This is a school-based walk, just not a walk where we had core and UnboundEd in. You put in the teacher's name. I just put myself as an example, but because it's already embedded in the system, it shows my name down there and what department I'm in, and then what course I observed. And then that third slide is our set right now of integrity indicators. So how are teachers using the curriculum? Are they using the proper lesson structures and terminology? Routines that they're mathematics language routines, pacing within the lesson, and then student participation, work completion, engagement. And so what you're seeing on the far right in the fourth box there is an example of what we mean by curriculum use and what we mean by how a teacher or is implementing that or not implementing that in a classroom. And so what we should be looking for, if we say does not attempt, this means that the teacher and the students do not attempt to use the materials from Open Up, which is our curriculum. But if we sort of want teachers to move towards that achieves level with the curriculum integrity indicator. And there's these descriptors for each of the different indicator. So people norm and understand what they are looking for. Again, this is going back to our goal of making sure that all teachers are using the curriculum with integrity. So, as we see movement over time, with teachers, we can collect that data and then see movement. So if you go to the next slide.
And while they're going to the next slide, I'm going to pop in for a moment.
Sure, go ahead.
There's a question that I think Kat answered in the chat around, did you get teacher pushback? But I do think it's timely now. And that is around, of course, especially some of our teacher leaders in the district that I work closely with. They're like, Emily, there's people in here all the time. What is this grant work that's happening? And we really had to message, particularly with our teacher leaders, this grant work is not for you. There's other professional learning, directly. There's other professional learning that we already have planned, that we're already doing for our teachers. This work that we're doing is honestly for our school-based instructional leadership teams, because the purpose is to build the school capacity. We mentioned earlier, we're the 3rd largest district in North Carolina, and I have a team of one person other than me working on middle school math at the district level. And so we had a strong commitment to building the school level leadership teams. And with that, they needed support, because particularly in math education, and I'm probably biased because I'm a math educator at heart, but all of the math teachers I've worked with have had experiences, most of them, where someone has come and tried to give feedback around math. And sometimes that's hard because the administrator giving you feedback, or the coach that's working with you, might not have a history of math education in their toolkit. They might be coming from a different core. And so really communicating that, yes, we hear you, but this is really for your instructional leadership teams, because we've all got to get on the same page about what it means to launch, explore, discuss, which is a part of our curriculum. What does it mean to facilitate a math discourse routine? And that really helped say, okay, I understand the purpose of this. And that's a little bit of a different purpose than working with teachers around understanding the curriculum. Because our purpose was working with instructional leadership teams. And Jimmy's going to tell you about this dashboard that's kind of helping the instructional leadership teams set goals for their school at the school level, not the individual teacher level, but at school level.
Sure. Yeah. No, thanks for jumping in there, Emily. And I think we've had some really great conversations with those instructional leadership teams, the principal, the assistant principals, the curriculum facilitators at the schools. And I'm sure Emily or Kat or Jamahr would be happy to talk to you more if you're interested in learning more about those things after the call, because it's been really impactful over the last 2 years, seeing everybody sort of get on board with this at the instructional leadership teams and sort of have that awakening, this is what we're supposed to be doing, that kind of thing. So yeah, like I mentioned before, we had the way, we had the way to collect the data once we had that app, but we also needed a way to visualize that data, make it accessible to people, where before it wasn't, in the year 1, it wasn't as accessible. It was there, it was in spreadsheets. People had to make calculations and things like that. And as your school leadership teams, they don't have time to do all that. They want to see, tell me what's happening, as quickly as possible, or make it so that I can filter and see things really quickly. So what you're seeing now is, again, Tricia built this out, is the Power BI dashboard that flows. Again, the data flows from the Power App to the Power BI dashboard, where you're seeing those indicators and the percentage of teachers who at the district level who are at those different levels you saw on its descriptors, right? Achieves, attempts, does not attempt, or lacks curriculum integrity in that box on the left. In the box on the right, you're seeing sort of average scores of that. We sort of transferred those words into 0 to 4 scale, and said, or 0 to 3 scale, sorry, and said, what indicators are we seeing sort of the most success on? What are the indicators that we need to work on more? Those kind of things. And so this has been really useful at the district level. We can see this at the school level. They would just see their school. So if you're a principal at Allen Middle School, you'll just see Allen Middle School's data. You won't see everybody else's, but you'll be able to filter by grade level, by teacher, the date of the actual walk through, that kind of thing. So we've been able to see, okay, yeah, we're making really good strides. The curriculum use is really, has gone up really well over the last year or so. We're still having some challenges in those routines, and Emily could talk more about how we sort of respond or are responding to that. But this has been a really good, and we're continuing to iterate on this and thinking about how to improve it. But have this accessible to the school leadership teams, but also to the district, so they can see how the activities of the grant are going and what areas they can help support in as well. So.
Yeah, so as you can imagine, at the district level, this has been helpful for us when we're thinking about providing workshops. At the district level, we are still kind of in a, let's do a workshop, and then the coach at the school level follows up with that workshop. But even this has been helpful to make sure that we are providing opportunities around math language routines. As you'll notice from the district, is the smallest, I don't know why I've lost my words, but the routines data is not as great as some of the other indicators that we have. So we've really amped up the amount of math language routines, which is a routine that's in our curriculum, and the sessions that we're providing that really digs into what are the different routines and how do you facilitate those in your classroom. And then at the school level, when they're looking at their school level trends, they can say, oh, you know what, I think we need to do some next level work around a launch, explore, discuss model in PLCs, because we're noticing that the lesson structure is really low for our school. So it's just been a really great tool to get an at a glance about school level data, not teacher specific. So it's for school level trends. We have another question in the chat that says, do you think the app made the data collection feasible for you? So absolutely. I think Jimmy mentioned that with our partners, UnboundEd and Core, they had introduced the DigiCoach app. And so that was already really helpful for us to be a quick data collector and also a quick data analyzer. But we just really saw the need to have that internally so that we could do a little bit more and have more timely data analysis of the indicators and the walks. So absolutely, it's definitely helped to make that easier to collect data, analyze data, and it's also, I think Jimmy's mentioned this, but it's worth repeating. It's encouraged schools to be doing these walks in between what we call the district integrity walks or the district learning walks. And that's the point. The point of this work has been to increase the school capacity of the school instructional leadership teams. And now that we have this internal app built, we at first started asking folks, do a couple between here and the next cycle of work just to get in the groove of it. And once they've done a couple, they're like, oh, wow, this is really easy. I can do this all the time. And our coaches and our principals and our assistant principals and everyone on the instructional leadership team have really given us a lot of feedback about how helpful it is to have one place to store and collect all of this data. I can't remember if Jimmy or I was doing it. So I'll start and Jimmy add in if you want to. So we're going to move on to year 2 because we spent a lot of time talking about that first year. I can't believe all of those outcomes came from that first year of the DCA when we were still confused about the purpose of the DCA. But year 2 rolls around and we actually moved it up to December. So the first year, I think it was sometime in the spring, maybe middle spring, sometime in that area. The second year, we're like, late, and that was a push from our partner and perhaps NIRN, I can't remember, but somebody pushed us to move that up in December so that we had time to respond even in this school year to some of the things that were happening. So in year 2, so this past December 2022 was our second DCA specifically around math curriculum implementation in middle school. And at this point, most of the team members really understood the importance of this collaboration time because as you all can already see, so many outcomes came out of that first year. So now everyone's coming in really understanding that this needs to be prioritized in schedules and calendars, and that we need to all make an effort to come engaged because important things are going to happen out of these conversations. So the goal for that year 2 for our internal sponsored driver regularly meeting folks was to really just have a temperature check of how have our processes improved and what should we prioritize for the remainder of year and in preparation for 23-24. so that we're ready to really roll out strong in the 23-24 school year, because that's the first year that we're really taking ownership of the grant work that we've been calling it, but now we're going to have to start calling it math implementation work, because it's about to not be grant work any longer. And we've already talked about how we're going to continue all of this. So some of the areas of strength that we found was that, as you can probably imagine, our scores on items regarding the data systems improved because of the work that our data department friends, Jimmy and Trisha, did with the app and the analysis of some of the data in the app. Also, our areas of strength are around the intentionality of DIT teams. I think for even us in the beginning, we were kind of unclear on who's meeting weekly and who's meeting quarterly and what the purpose of those teaming structures are. But I think it's become clear to us now that yes, there is a time and space where we need a regular check-in for a core group that's really driving the work with the sponsors and drivers. But then there's also a real need for the DIT team, the larger group, to meet, to analyze data, to be a part of the activities that are happening. So that's not been one of our strengths in the very beginning of this grant, is everyone on the DIT team understanding the importance of going on walks. So the folks at the district level who might not have a school that's doing the walks. So in the beginning, they weren't going on them, but oh, wait a second. When I was asked to go on one, I'm an EC director, and the math director and EC director were able to have a conversation about how these two things are interrelated and how our departments can be working together with math curriculum implementation. And folks on the larger DIT team are started to understand that. And so I think that was another area of strength in that year too that came out, because we made sure we had multiple perspectives on the team, and because folks were starting to come to some of the activities and get their hands dirty in the work, the conversations and collaboration were definitely strengthened. And then an area of growth moving forward is definitely the written processes and plans. We talked about that a bit in year one, and that's still a work in progress for us. An example for this year that has come out of this work is we realized in the DCA that we do a whole lot of coaching in our district. We have external coaches, we have school-based coaches, we have principals and APs that sometimes also do coaching. We have a middle school math coordinator that coaches middle school math teachers. But as far as having an overall plan for what is the goal of all of the coaching and what are the different roles of the 7,000 different coaching members we have in our district, we didn't have a written plan for that. I kind of knew what our goal was, and everyone involved in the work knows that we're working on curriculum implementation and our focus is on math discourse for the math department. But as far as written plans with written goals and planned data that we're collecting to think about how those coaching practices are affecting the practice of math teaching in Guilford County, we didn't have a written plan. And we are still in the process of making one, but I would say a huge understanding and outcome of that DCA was, hey, this is something that needs to be prioritized. And we also need to think about how the coaching that we're doing with math is fitting into our systems, our Guilford County school systems definition and understanding of what it means to be an instructional coach. So conversations have started having across departments. We have a larger group for teaching and learning and professional development that's made up of all of the different departments. And we actually had a little side group that met that talked about, hey, you know what, maybe we need a common definition of what instructional coaching is and what the expectations are for different departments that are doing coaching. And so I remember I emailed Yolanda because it was recently after the DCA, and I was like, hey, what kind of resources do you have? Because I'm not even sure what written plans I need to have or what needs to be on my written plan. And so that work, the resources that NIRN was able to share with us through Yolanda helped us kind of start to think about what this needs to look like in the future. We've created some templates for different departments to use. Again, that's still a work in progress because it's a big project, but that's a big insight that came out of that year too, and something that we're working on. Jimmy, any additions for year two?
I think you covered it. Yeah.
Okay, great. So next steps, I just mentioned that we're drafting district templates not just for the math department's coaching plans, but even for our larger district coaching plan. We're just having discussion around sustaining the activities. We've already mentioned that. We're already talking about implementing DIT team members for math in middle school and actually K-12, and what that looks like and what the purpose of those teams are. We're also starting to think about, yes, we've been focused on instructional leadership teams at the school level for the last 2 years. And yes, we've also had professional learning going on for teachers. But let's create a bit tighter and stronger plan that identifies the different stakeholders at different levels and make sure that all of this professional learning that we're planning for our building leaders and for our coaches and for our teachers are all playing with each other and connecting with each other across the system. So taking a more system lens about planning professional learning. And then lastly, we're still thinking about using data to reflect more regularly in DIT meetings. Kat mentioned earlier that the larger DIT group met quarterly, but we're even talking next year about making that monthly, just so that we have a regular touch point with those DIT members, and also that they know when events are happening with the grant work or the implementation work, and are always staying in touch and in the know with the different activities that are happening, and that we can make sure that we're getting their perspective throughout. I think that's it for us.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing to Emily, sorry, is on that last point is we talked a lot about the walkthrough, instructional walkthrough data. We also, like Pat mentioned, there are many other sources of data, and trying, especially around the surveys that we're administering to teachers, students, the principals, also the regular performance data that we collect for students as well. And we've tried to intersperse those into some of the DIT meetings, but also trying to think about how all these things, tie together. In our last DIT meeting where we went over the end of the year data and the survey data and all, there were some really good questions that came up from members of the group about how these things are interconnected or could be interconnected. So we want to keep exploring that and tie those into those meetings, those monthly meetings that Emily's talking about.
Thank you for that, Jimmy. I think it's time to turn it over to Kat.
Thank you, guys. And you've covered a lot of what I was going to say too, of just kind of takeaways. I wanted to share about the DCA specifically because it's such a big part of the process. It takes a lot of work and a lot of time out of people's busy schedules, but knowing that what they get out of it is a lot of valuable reflection. As they're having those conversations, they're able to, but very vulnerable, and they're able to push each other to work on improving the systems and processes when they don't have the scores that they hope for. And so they're having those vulnerable conversations, even with a chief academic officer, to say, hey, this is our score of 0 in this area. What do we need to do to push this forward across the system? They're looking at conversations to give guidance to the team to improve implementation, and their focus is on math implementation. But when they've been talking in the DCA conversations, it's gone further than that, and it's gone more to the system level and not just specifically to math curriculum implementation. So each year, they've taken this very seriously. It's been honest conversations. There's times, like Emily and Jimmy were talking about, where somebody may not know how to score something because they don't have the information to it. And so it's given them a lot of opportunity to truly reflect on what they know and what they can have control over, and then what they need to do to work as a district team to make those changes. So then I'll talk about their data. Go ahead to the next slide. So with the data, as Jimmy was saying, there's so much that is collected that they really have to think about, what are we doing with this data? So we're surveying teachers, we're surveying students, we're doing these integrity walks in teachers' classrooms. What are we doing with that data? That way it doesn't just become a waste. Something else that we talked about, and Emily said this too, of really being consistent of those district implementation teams, getting them on the calendar at the very beginning of the year before everybody's calendar goes crazy, and setting in stone those invitations. And like Emily said, this year we did them quarterly. It's shown that they need them monthly because there is so much data collected that it gets overwhelming if you wait for quarterly conversations. And then really making sure that each member of the team has that opportunity to reflect on the process and really look at those goals and think about why am I on the team, and what stakeholders am I affecting in this process, and what information do I need to bring to the table when it comes to making the decisions for curriculum implementation. So before we open the floor, I did want to share something that we have put together at Unbound Core Learning about this approach and things that we've learned along this process. We know curriculum implementation is messy. We know implementation of any effort is messy, but we've been working on this with Guilford and other schools in partnership, and we just wanted to share our experience with you. So with that, we want to open the floor to any questions that people might have. Yolanda, I'm going to pass it to you for anything that you would like to say about opening the floor for questions and answers. And you can go to the next slide.
Yes, thank you so much, Kat, Jamahr, Emily, and Jimmy, sharing all that information about the work that you've been doing to get that high quality mathematics curriculum up and running in Guilford County Schools. Did have a question that came through a direct chat, and that was to Guilford County. How did you get the district team on board with coming in for a multi-hour, 3-hour meeting for the district capacity assessment?
I remember we got that question when we did the podcast a while back, and we joked that lunch always helps. And that's still true. But also just knowing, giving examples for new team members. I think this year I gave a couple of examples to our new team members about, hey, when we did this the first year, here are some of the conversations that happened, and here are some of the outcomes, and we really need your perspective for this reason. I think help folks feel valued and know why their voice is so needed at that table.
Thank you, Emily.
Yeah, and I would add on, schedule it ahead, like Emily was talking about. We put that meeting on for the district capacity assessment at least a month ahead of time, if not a little bit more, just so that everybody was locked in on that date, and couldn't be like, oh, well, I didn't have time. There was no time in my schedule that week to do anything. So.
Wonderful. And you've been answering questions throughout as well. So I appreciate you doing those right on the moment, in the moment questions. We want to just leave it open for anyone else for a few minutes to see if there are any questions that you have.
Is it okay if I jump in?
Of course, go right ahead.
Thanks. I really appreciated hearing about the DCA and the uses and how it was applied. I'm really curious. I've done these kind of needs assessments before, but the first time you do it, how long do you think you would allot? I know the more you do it, the more the language gets common and the discussion can be anticipated, expected, et cetera. But for that first initial application of the DCA, what's a safe amount of time to tell people that they're going to be involved?
That's a great question, Chris. Generally, we ask people to schedule a 2-hour block so that they can really have time for discussion. One of the things that was really good is that Guilford anticipated that they would want more time to be able to talk, so they scheduled that a longer block of time. But generally, 2 hours is about the time that it would take to get through the questions and have meaningful discussions.
Thank you. And a quick follow-up. I assume that this is a tool that is best used with an external facilitator or somebody that's not also trying to vote. Would that be a fair assumption?
I would say yes. I would definitely recommend having that outside facilitator. Also, having someone that's trained in administering the DCA. So there's a course. When you go to the link that was put in the chat with the DCA, there's a DCA course so that that person knows how to administer the DCA, facilitate that DCA, and having that outside facilitator allows someone to be able to step back and not be part of the discussion, but also sometimes you got to push a little of where those questions come or where those responses coming from. And sometimes that can be a little bit easier if you have an outside facilitator. And Rebecca just dropped in that resource again in the chat.
Perfect. Hey,
Great
thanks,
question.
guys. This is really helpful today. Really appreciate it. Thanks for sharing.
And just to add on to what Yolanda was saying, I was just talking with our MTSS director at the end of our last DIT meeting, and they do it like Emily was talking about, a similar type process with the schools, and they have there's a district team that gets trained in how to administer that specific tool that's very similar to the DCA to those schools, and go in and be sort of that neutral party who's helping administer that at the school level too. So.
What
And
other questions?
I'll say too, with that of the administration, having somebody outside that's able to push the conversation, because when you first start it, at first everybody's just putting down their rating, and it sometimes can be where you want to look to the chief academic officer for their rating to then have everybody respond to it, but really setting the tone of this is everybody's experience, and being vulnerable was so key. And we loved having Yolanda with us with our experience, because she was able to probe those conversations and push the thinking. And it did take us 3 hours both years, because it pushed everybody to ask questions and get clarification before they truly got a consensus rating. And there were several times where they did not come to a full consensus, and that was okay.
What other questions can we answer for you? Well, I want to thank you all for coming out today. You can see the contact information there for Jamahr and Kat at UnboundEd Core, as well as Emily and Jimmy if you have those questions. And you can also reach out to NIRN at nirn@unc.edu if you want some more information. I'm seeing some wonderful thank yous and love to the Guilford team and the UnboundEd Core team for their presentation today. Thank you all. We really appreciate you for coming. We appreciate UnboundEd and Guilford for sharing. So I hope